Well, brother, what's up, brothers and sisters? It's your brother G World 7_D. Here's a book by Nasheed Al Emin. It's called True Myth: Black Vikings of the Middle Ages. All right, I'm going to turn to page 103. Give me a little bit more light. And I'm going to read just mostly straight up. All right, it comes from the chapter Dark Shores, Dark Gods. All right, and I'm going to highlight a few things that you see. Although most historians that discuss the Danelaw trace its beginnings to Treaty of Wedmere in 878, the period in which its full effect was felt was a decade later, after another treaty between Alfred of Guthrum in 886 established its southern boundary. Gwyn Jones asserts that its political independence lasted only about 50 years. However, its separate, i.e. Scandinavia, quality was recognized not only by Alfred and his English successors, but by the laws of Canute in the early 11th century and by the Norman lawgivers after the Norman conquest. So, for at least 2 centuries, at least half of what will become the England that we know was effectively under Danish control, which would be extended to at least the onset of the 12th century under different Norse and Norman rulers. Those French-speaking Norsemen from Normandy who invaded England under William the Conqueror in 1066. Non-Norse or Norman England and Scotland in the north was still a mishmash of warring ethnicities who had been migrating and commingling in the Isles since before the time of Roman occupation. Britons, Silures, Meatai, Caledonians, Scots, Picts, Iceni, Welsh, dark-skinned tribes who had lost most of their original territories and influence to Romans, Saxons, Belgae, and other Caucasian invaders, perhaps Angles, who had forced the darker-skinned races over westward into the Isles and southward. In the case of many early Britons who fled across the Channel to the northwestern tip of France, where they are known to us as Britons, in the area we know today as Brittany, a century or two before Norse invasions began. Alfred would form alliances with many of these dispossessed peoples in his efforts to stem the Norse tide during the 9th century. Many of these peoples had been coerced into giving up their old gods and accepting Christianity, the religion of their Aryan overlords, who were fortified by their connection to Rome and sought to Christianize all of Britain in order to forestall a complete takeover by the heathen Danish invaders. Much the same was occurring in Ireland, whose black and dark-skinned inhabitants were akin to those in Britain and Wales, black Celtic descendants of the ancient Neolithic race who had formerly overspread all of Europe, out of which the Basques, Iberians, the small, swarthy Welshmen, the small, dark Highlander, and the black Celts to the west of Shannon, and the typical inhabitants of Aquitaine and Brittany, all emerged. Now, he took that from David McRitchie, but I want you to notice it right here, that what I'm reading, if you can see it clearly. Let me get a better view. Here you see, the dark-skinned inhabitants were akin to those in Britain and Wales, the black Celtic descendants of the ancient Neolithic race from which they had formerly overspread all of the black Celts to the west of Shannon. Okay, I'm going to keep going and read. The black Celts of Ireland fled or were driven across the Shannon River in western Ireland, where their descendants could be found or could be discerned even a millennium afterwards. Their location in the western portion of the Emerald Isles attests to their having been, as in the case of Britain, in the western portion of Britain's main island, invaded by white-skinned peoples, probably Saxons, entering Ireland from the east or southeast just had been the case in England. The Scotti, who, as mentioned earlier, had arrived from Egypt, fled north, crossing the North Channel to Scotland, where many of their relatives and countrymen would linger in Northern Ireland for many more centuries. I want you to look at that part where it says Scottish. Excuse me, Scott. I can get it clear. Yeah, the Scotti, who, as mentioned earlier, had arrived from Egypt, fled north across the North Channel into Scotland. Now, I think I mentioned before that Queen Scotia was, I believe, Akhenaten's daughter. Uh, that's what supposedly Scotland was named after, a black Egyptian queen. The Egyptians were in the British Isles because you can also see several stag hunts, but by like probably Pharaoh Tutankhamun, I believe, where you see the greyhound dog there. The greyhound dog is based in Europe. And you also see images of rabbits, which is in southern Europe, and you see them with the Mayan in America. So that just tells you the connection there between the black population in America, Africa, and Europe. All you got to do is look at the flora and the fauna. Study that, and you'll be able to connect a lot of this stuff. This information's there. Like I keep saying over and over again, it's insulting when I hear people say that we're descendants of African slaves. That, to me, that's an insult to our damn ancestors who built civilizations globally. But too many of our people do not know how to critically think. And unfortunately, when you go to these schools, you're taught to think in a box, like I've said this over and over again. You're not taught to think independently on your own. You're taught to basically, you see a square, you put a square in the square. You know what I'm saying? You're not told to think outside of the square and to come upon an idea, original thought from your own self. You're just supposed to go by and memorize and read the crap that you're given and believe what they're telling you, which is mostly a lie. All right, I'm gonna go on. I'm gonna skip a little bit. Here. I'm gonna go right here. But those above were addition to building an irrigation system with water flowing through lead pipes. No, I'm gonna go right. Western historians have almost never presented an accurate account of black civilizations in Europe, for which the rise of white European civilization is indebted. Significant in this were the achievement by the Moors occupying Iberia, the Iberians, which Western historians invariably attribute to Arabs, obfuscate the black African presence there. So, along with what was mentioned in the last chapter, a few more contributions deserve mention. Okay, and then I'm gonna go on. But these above were in addition. They, for instance, introduced the silk industry into Spain. In the field of agriculture, they introduced rice, sugarcane, dates, ginger, cotton, lemons, strawberries into the country. But these above were in addition to building irrigation systems with water flowing through lead pipes through the mountains of Cordova, introducing brass and iron industries, public schools, and the first real universities in Europe. While in Christian Europe, 99% of the people were illiterate, and even the kings could neither read nor write. Now, I've always connected different land masses. You had great irrigation systems here in America that the black population, the black civilization is built here in America, as you had in Asia, as you had it over in Africa, and then they were doing it in Europe. You know, the Moors had paved streets, street lights, so they had all that over in Europe. But my main thing is to connect. I'm always trying to connect the Americas to so-called Africa, to Asia, and to Europe, and then you realize that you had black civilizations globally. You can't just, when I'm hearing a lot of these Negroes historians, they're speaking as if black folks were stuck in one part of the world. They didn't know how to navigate. They didn't know how to travel around the world. They were just stuck in West Africa. so-called Negro Africa. That's ignorant, that's racist, and it's dumb when black historians do that and follow that trail. But it just tells me that these bastards haven't done no research themselves. They just regurgitating what my white mommy and daddy had taught them. All right, I'm gonna go even further. All right, let's see. I'm gonna go even further, and I'm gonna read even further with this. All right, the reinvasion of the Iberian Peninsula by the Moors in 711 A.D. and afterwards extended and built upon earlier African invasions that had been interpreted primarily by the Roman conquest during the Punic Wars against Carthage. With black and dark-skinned men once more dominant in the Mediterranean and southwestern territories of Europe, again commanding the Pillars of Hercules, black-skinned Danes and other Norsemen dominated the northern land from the eastern shores of the Baltic to the British Isles. We can understand more plainly why McRitchie declared the Dark Age is dark in a double sense, because it's black. But let me go. I'm gonna show you that what it says. The black skin. Let me get a clear image right here. Pull that up. Here it is, right here. With black and dark-skinned men once more dominant in the Mediterranean and the southwestern territories of Europe, again commanding the Pillars of Hercules, and black-skinned Danes and other Norsemen dominated the northern lands from the eastern shores of the Baltic to the British Isles. We can understand more plainly why McRitchie declared the Dark Age is dark in the double sense. And so he's talking about the original people, even in northern Europe, originally were black, which they were. See, white folks are not indigenous to Europe. They're not indigenous to anything. When you look at that Hathor, was it the cow goddess of Egypt? You see that cow horns. The Vikings wore that like that cow horn on their head. They took that from earlier black civilizations. All right, they took that from earlier black. So what they was doing wearing that little cow horn on their head, that was stuff that went from other black civilizations that was older, that predated what developed into those pirates known as the Vikings. All right, let me go even further. Okay, I might have gotten lost. Oh, by the close of the 9th century, the Danes had annexed half or more of what would become England. Norwegians had held territories in Ireland, Scotland, and most of the islands between them. Danes had carved out a sizable territory in northern France, Normandy, but still rampaged throughout the west of the country, and mainly Swedish Vikings, called Rus or Rios, as well as Varganians, as established a number of settlements in the future Russia and dominated the eastern Baltic, completely occupying the coast of Finland, Latvia, and Estonia. During the late 9th century, mainly Norwegian Vikings, most account, but surely a good portion of Danes, had begun migrating to Iceland, which had been discovered in 860 by Gardar, a Dane of Swedish descent. Okay, I'm going to go even further. I'm going to skip a little bit. I'm going to skip right, I'm going to go right here. Yeah, because I don't read all this, but the state of affairs in Europe did not bode well for those Europeans of lighter. Well, no, I'm gonna go back. Consider the often bloody conflict that arose between Norwegians and Danes in Ireland during the 9th century. It is unlikely that the Danes would have stood idly by and allowed Norwegians to wholly settle Iceland, an island territory that a Dane had discovered. Danes, remember, were considered the royal race of the emerging Scandinavian nation, and from Denmark had early on colonized southern Norway and Sweden, so that the term Dane could have been applied to almost any Norse inhabitant of the three Viking nations. Dane, an earlier mention, perhaps implying black or black men. Okay, let me see if I can get it clear, about as clear as I can get on this picture. Okay, I'm going to read. We have looked at how Western scholars have continually obscured the black presence in Europe, and the reader is reminded of the distinction Irish historians made between Norwegian and Danish Vikings, designated them as white and black foreigners, respectively. So it would not be surprising that calling the settlers of Ireland Norwegian is further attempt at obfuscating the presence of blacks or blacks Norsemen. In this case, in Iceland and North America, which Norsemen will soon begin probing. However, even if this is so, the reader has been presented with evidence that Norwegian Norsemen were black and dark-skinned, and more evidence regarding this will be offered when some of the settlers in Iceland are discussed in ensuing chapters. Now, I might talk about Thorhall and Thorfinn because they came to the Americas. Those are Negro Vikings. I had my book that talks about that. One of my books that talk what I have on the Vikings that talks about Thorhall. So yeah, I might get in there if I can find that. I'm gonna talk about that because a lot of your black Vikings were coming to America. The state of affairs in Europe did not bode well for those Europeans of lighter hue, in whose hearts burned the dreams of continent of white-skinned inhabitants. Those who longed to complete the version of the early Romans who first attempted this seemingly impossible undertaking. The organization, inventiveness, and formidable legions of Western Roman Empire were a distinct memory now, and Western Europe seemed on the verge of being overwhelmed by the hordes of black and dark-skinned men now rampaging throughout most of the continent. And let me skip. I'm thinking I'm gonna skip down to here because I want to make some good emphasis. Okay, here is. I'll read this part right here. But we are primarily concerned with the race of the Norsemen of the Viking Age, and in Welsh, author B.J. Charles' Old Norse relation with Wales. The historian explains the early historians made a conscious attempt to distinguish the Danes from the Norwegians, and although Charles' discourse on Norwegians predating Danes in Ireland and battling Danes for dominance of the Isle, he discusses in several Danish invasions during the mid-9th century, like the one led by Horm, also Gorm, a chieftain of no small standing in Ireland, who came with his dubbed Genti, black Gentiles, or black host, to Ireland. And despite the conscious attempt at chroniclers, especially early Irish chroniclers, to depict Norwegians and Danes as racially dissimilar, there is no logical reason to entertain this assertion. It has been remarked upon that the black-skinned Egyptian megalithic builders were among the earliest settlers of Denmark and Sweden. There's that connection to Egypt, to the original Vikings. There's a damn connection. I want you to pick up on this. It has been remarked upon that the black-skinned Egyptian megalithic builders were among the earliest settlers of Denmark and Sweden. Remember, I've always said that our people travel. When you listen to these goofballs on YouTube, they just have black people. They just think that black people were just sitting in one region, like I just said. They did not migrate out and move to different spots of the world. They was always curious. They wanted to travel. They were great explorers, seeking knowledge and seeking to build globally. That's how our ancestors were. They weren't stagnant, just like you hear from Pan-Africans who are stagnant. And I want to tell these brothers this, like Aboriginal Power and all you brothers, don't waste your time on idiots like Rob Bourne, a grown man and wearing some big-ass sidelights in his head, man. Like he's ancient Egypt, some horse from ancient Egypt. Man, don't pay. These guys are clowns. Them guys are clowns, man. Don't waste your time. Just continue to do your research, your studying, and build your issue. Don't waste your time debating with these bozos. Garfield, he's an idiot. Don't waste your time doing that. Now I'm gonna go back reading what I've been reading. All right. And damn, I think I lost my place. No, but here it is. Now I'm gonna go back. I might double up a little bit. Yeah, here I am right here. All right. Black Gentiles, and and despite the conscious attempt by chroniclers, especially early chroniclers, to depict the Norwegians dissimilar. Okay, I read that part. But here's the part I'm gonna go back. It has been remarked upon that black-skinned, which I just read, black-skinned Egyptian megalithic builders were among the earliest settlers of Denmark and Sweden. Black-skinned Kimbra occupied Denmark and were also called Dana, and were probably descendants of the Tuatha de Danann. That these Cimbri spread into Norway and Sweden. That the early Vikings out of Norway were short stature and dark skinned like Finns. I said in the Oslo sleigh, you see these little short, diminutive Negroes on the sleigh. They had little afros. That was an ancient like ship of the Vikings, and he had these little images of these little Negroes on there. All right. Yeah. Short stature, dark skin like Finns. That other Irish historians, as indicated by Mitchison, called both Danes and Norwegians black Gentiles, and that the Danes, Norwegians, and Swedes who resemble Danes freely intermarry with each other, with numbers of each in regard to Norsemen being black-skinned, have made any claim to whites being among their general numbers, and this writer will no longer entertain the issue, except to assume that a Norse personage, a color name, the white, was either Caucasian or a very light-skinned black man. Right? Basically, these are Negroes, man. And I want you to see if I can focus on and show what I just read. And see if I can get a good focus of it. Because this is some information that, up here it is. Oh, shoot, I just came in focused on what I want brothers and sisters to really do your deep research. Because, like I said, don't listen to these Pan-African Negroes who just have you coming from Africa, West Africa, say that you're Nigerian, a country that didn't exist until the freaking 60s, man. So, and it was named after, I want to say, Nigeria was named after Lady Lagarde. She wrote a book called The Tropical Dependency. I believe it was named after her. Or she named it. The country Nigeria. Lady Lagarde. I think that's her name. And she wrote the book The Tropical Dependency. Alright. And a tropical dependency. Here, let me get a good view. I'm trying to get a home there and up here. But you can try to see that it talks about how all these individuals were black. You know, talk about the black Gentiles and the Danes, Norwegian and Swedes who resemble Danes, frequently intermarry with each other, and these are all Negroes. Now, Darcy, right here, black host, depict Norwegian. It has been remarked that that the black-skinned Egyptian megalithic builders were among the earliest settlers of Denmark and Sweden. Black-skinned here it is right here. Okay, read this, show this again. That the early Vikings out of Norway were short stature and dark-skinned like Finns. All right, this is all in David McRitchie's book. The other Irish historians, as indicated by Mitchison, call both Danes and Norwegians black Gentiles, and that the Danes, groups represented in each Scandinavian territory. These are all Negroes, man. These are all Negroes, and I want you to understand that. All right, I want you, brothers and sisters, to comprehend that and understand that these are all Negroes. And I'm maybe almost out of time on with my phone, but I want to go one more. I'm gonna skip over because there's some more stuff I would like to read in this book, but I gotta skip over. I want to show you this. All right, I'll read this real quick. I have not come across any references to the Slavs being other than Caucasian or white-skinned, although the area they inhabited in Russia was long prone to migrations, intrusions, or outright invasions by dark-skinned peoples, Turks, Huns, and other peoples out of Tartary. If Slavs were essentially Caucasian, it is safe to say they were admixture with the races who are known to have crossed or settled in adjacent territories or within the Slavonic rim as well. The factors The factors most responsible for lightening of the black-skinned races of Scandinavia may be thousands of Slavs carried into slavery, intermarriage, and concubinage in Scandinavian lands over 2 or more centuries. That's what I want to write there. Remember, I kept explaining how one reason that a lot of those areas got whitened up because they're bringing in white slaves, particularly white women, and impregnating them, having these little mulatto kids. Right? Reference to the Slavs and other. And the Slavics are little white slaves, although the area, and then he goes on right here. And this is in the book. Although outright invasions by dark-skinned people, Turks, Huns, and other peoples of the Tartary, the Slavs were essentially Caucasian. It is safe to say they were admixture with the races who are known to have crossed or settled in adjacent territories or within the Slavonic rim, as well as the factors most responsible for the lightening of the concubines, or the lightening of the black-skinned races of Scandinavia. Lightening of the black-skinned races of Scandinavia may be the thousands of Slavs carried into slavery, intermarriage, and concubinage in Scandinavian lands over 2 or more centuries. I'm going to stop right there. All right. Remember I said in North Africa they were doing that. They were pumping in a large number of white slaves. So they was pumping in white slaves and they was having babies by these white slaves, these white females. Yes, they had some black slaves too, but mostly slaves were white women. All right, I read that out of this book, and you can get that in numerous books. But this is a book. It's a good book. I had this, man. I forgot long I had this, but I had this for a while. And this is a good book because it talks about the original Vikings were black. But besides that, I'm not. That's not my main. Just my main general point. My main point is to emphasize that white folks not indigenous to Europe. That white folks originally came into these lands as slaves. All right, they were slaves. You had black rulers, black masters, white slaves. And I have other books that talk about white slaves. Because I remember that idiot Angel Ramirez Jordan saying that white slaves weren't brought over here, they were just indentured servants. No, you had white slaves being brought over here. You also had Asian slaves being brought over here, being, what you call it, sacrificed by the certain black ruling tribes or nations who were running over here. Because some nations practiced sacrification, some of them didn't. So this is something that when you really study your history, there's some good and some bad in it. But when you really study your history, you get really in depth with it. You will really learn and pick up so many different things. You will realize that you're beyond a slave from Africa. That's the most dumbest asinine thing that I've heard from so many Negroes. But like I said, when you look at some stag hunt pictures, where you see Tutankhamun, you see the greyhound dog. That's most likely Britain. You see those doggone rabbits. That's Southern Europe, particularly Spain. You also see those images of a rabbit with the Mayans. So the Mayans were in freaking Spain. Because why would you have rabbits over that originated in Europe and they're partying? You see on Mayan murals, you see rabbits. And you see individuals, they holding a rabbit. Someone of high dignitary, high status holding a rabbit. So they traveled around the world and they got animals around the world. Remember I told you Mayans were the high spiritual priest. Also Maya was a mother of Buddha. So Buddha's mother was a priestess, a high spiritual priestess. You see how this stuff connects from land to land to land? Our people were not no slaves from Africa. Were there slaves brought from Africa? Very few. Especially to North America. They were mostly brought, you see, in Brazil, but even most of those Negroes are Aboriginal. You had more slaves brought there who mixed in with the Aboriginal blacks there. Same thing for the Caribbean. We have been reclassified. There was constant movement from blacks in the Caribbean coming to what you call mainland North America, and then mainland North America going to the Caribbean. There was always a constant movement. Our people weren't just situated in one part and just sat there. So you got to be more creative with your thinking and be more research oriented how you go about studying this history. You can't just sit up there and believe what this white man tell you that you was a slave. While they explored the world, we just sat there landlocked and didn't travel. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. So I'm telling you this information. This is a pretty good book, but like I said, I want to connect certain things. I'm going to try to find my Van Sertima book, and it shows you when he said that the original people of Americas were black. The idiot Amawale Africa said that black people are not the original people here. Van Sertima said himself in that book, that follow-up that came before Columbus. All right? He said that himself. So I'm continuing to give you sources. I'm continuing to bang these dumbass Pan-African. But I want you, brothers and sisters, don't waste your time debating them because they're idiots. They don't know nothing. They have not done no real research. They're jackasses and they're fools. And I think they're nothing but agents, man. Agent provocateurs. They're sellouts and they're traitors, man. If you're not listening to them. All right, brothers and sisters. Peace and love. It's your brother G1.